How can you die before death and still live? It sounds impossible, even absurd. Every human being fears death, yet the mystics of every tradition describe it as liberation. While modern culture strives to preserve the ego through identity, legacy, and achievement, the Sufi path invites the opposite: die before you die. The Prophet Muhammad expressed it clearly: die before you die. Ibn Arabi, the great Andalusian philosopher, mystic, interpreted this not as physical death, but as the annihilation of illusion, the fan of the false self. It is not the end of life, but the end of identification with what is transient. True life, he argued, begins only after the psychological death of illusion, the dissolution of separateness, ownership, and self-importance. The body continues, but the identity that clings to it no longer dominates. To understand this paradox, we must first examine why the mind clings so tightly to illusion in the first place. In psychological terms, the modern self is fragmented. It defines itself by roles, achievements, and external validation. Social identity becomes a substitute for inner stability. As a result, most of our mental activity revolves around protecting a fragile story about who I am. From a neuroscientific standpoint, this sense of self is maintained by the default mode network, a set of brain regions that generate continuous self-referential thought. It is the voice narrating, I am succeeding, I am failing, I am being judged. This network stitches experiences into a coherent narrative, a useful survival function, but it also produces the illusion of a separate, controlling one. The consequences are visible everywhere: chronic anxiety, loneliness, and identity crises. People spend enormous energy preserving the narrative self, confusing it with reality itself. A simple example is social media. Platforms reward self-presentation and comparison, strengthening ego persistence. Every like reinforces the neural loop that says, I exist because others see me. Modern psychology offers a corrective. Mindfulness research shows that when identification with thought loosens, when people see mental content as transient rather than defining, emotional suffering decreases. Centuries earlier, Ibn Arabi identified the same pattern, not as a social pathology, but as a metaphysical misunderstanding of what it means to exist. Ibn Arabi, known as Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest master, is one of the most influential figures in Islamic metaphysics. His central doctrine, Wahdat al-Wujud, or unity of being, proposes that only the real al-Haq truly exists. Everything else exists only by relation, as shadows or reflections of the one reality. He writes, the world is imagination, Kyle, yet it is the imagination of the real. To die before you die, therefore, means awakening from identification with transient reflections, the forms, identities, and distinctions that mask the underlying unity. Physical death ends bodily illusion. Psychological death ends existential illusion. Ibn Arabi's task is not to escape the world, but to perceive it accurately, as the divine imagining itself through you. Let us break down his model into clear conceptual steps. According to Ibn Arabi, the cosmos is neither purely real nor unreal. It is imaginal. Like a vivid dream, it exists and is experienced, yet its substance is consciousness itself. Everything you perceive, self, world, others, is a dynamic manifestation of divine attributes, not separate entities. An analogy helps. When dreaming, you interact with vivid forms. Mountains, people, conversations, but they are all expressions of one mind. The dream's reality is relational. Likewise, the world is the imaginal unfolding of divine awareness. Modern cognitive science points in a similar direction. Perception is not a mirror of reality, but a simulation constructed by the brain from sensory and predictive models. The external world you experience is filtered through memory, bias, and expectation. Suffering, Ibn Arabi would say, arises when we mistake the image for the source, when we cling to appearances as if they possess independent being. Recognizing life as imaginal does not devalue it. It clarifies it. The world remains meaningful, but meaning derives from participation in divine consciousness, not from ownership. The next step is dissolving the illusion of ownership, the belief that I am the doer. Ibn Arabi insists there is no actor but God. You are the locus of his action. The ego's greatest attachment is to authorship, the sense that I think, I decide, I control. Yet both Sufi insight and neuroscience challenge this assumption. Research found that brain activity indicating a decision can occur before conscious awareness of choice. Other work reinforced the illusion of conscious will. Our feeling of agency is a narrative reconstruction, not a real-time command. Ibn Arabi's metaphysical reading of this would be simple. Control belongs to the real. The self merely witnesses the unfolding of divine causality through its form. To die before death is to perceive that personal control was never absolute, and to surrender the anxiety that comes from defending that illusion. Psychologically, this realization generates humility and freedom. You still act, but without psychological possession. You participate without claiming authorship. In Sufi psychology, fan means annihilation, the dissolution of the self's illusion. Back means subsistence, living through divine awareness after ego death. During fan, the boundaries of I fade. The seeker realizes that all attributes, intelligence, compassion, even will, are divine in origin. Nothing truly belongs to the finite self. In back, life resumes, but through a transformed consciousness. The person acts in the world, yet perceives each act as divine expression. The self becomes transparent, a channel rather than a center. Studies on deep meditation provide an empirical echo. Reduced activity in the default mode network correlates with selfless awareness and feelings of unity. People report a loss of subject-object distinction, yet remain vividly conscious. Even outside contemplative practice, profound transformations can trigger similar experiences. Survivors of near-death or trauma often describe the collapse of old identities, followed by renewed clarity and compassion. What dies is the psychological scaffolding. What emerges is direct participation in being. For Ibn Arabi, the ultimate engine of ego death is love, maga. Love dissolves boundaries more effectively than intellectual analysis. It erases the distinction between lover, beloved, and love itself. He writes, "He who knows love knows God, for love is his essence made visible." Love expands perception beyond the self's frame of reference. Modern emotional neuroscience aligns with this. States of compassion and awe can deactivate self-referential regions of the brain, while increasing connectivity through oxytocin and vagal tone. Thus, love is not sentimental, it is neurologically transformative. It loosens the neural and psychological architecture of ego maintenance. Death before death, then, is not nihilism or withdrawal. It is expansion through love, until the illusion of separateness melts into unity. The central paradox remains: how can something die if it never truly existed? Ibn Arabi's answer is ontological. The ego has no independent being. It is a veil, not an entity. What dies is the illusion of autonomy, the mistaken belief that the reflection is the source. Only the real truly is. In philosophical terms, this reframes death as epistemic, not ontic. The physical body perishes once. The psychological illusion must die continuously through awareness. Importantly, this is not detachment from life, but clarity within it. You still love, act, and create, but without the distortions of ownership. Here, Ibn Arabi's thought converges with the insight of no self, though the foundation differs. Buddhism emphasizes emptiness. Ibn Arabi grounds the same insight in divine fullness, not the absence of self, but its reabsorption into infinite love. Modern psychology provides supporting evidence. Studies of people confronting mortality show that awareness of death often increases altruism, gratitude, and authenticity. Realizing impermanence dissolves trivial attachment. By consciously rehearsing ego death, one aligns perception with the structure of reality rather than the fiction of control. To die before death is to awaken before circumstances force awakening. How can these ideas be lived? Cognitive reappraisal of identity. Regularly observe self-referential thoughts. I am failing, I am admired, I am afraid, as mental events, not personal truths. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy shows that such observation reduces rumination and depressive identification. In Ibn Arabi's language, this is the fan of conceptual identity. Daily ego dissolution practices. Sufi dhikr, rhythmic remembrance of divine names, cultivates awareness that all power and action derive from the real. Repetitive recitation can slow heart rate, activate parasympathetic calm, and synchronize breathing with neural rhythms, producing measurable coherence between heart and brain. Memento mori, reflection. Contemplate mortality consciously. Mortality awareness can increase value, clarity, and gratitude. For the mystic, remembering death dissolves illusory permanence and reorients attention toward the eternal. Service and empathy. Engage in altruism and compassionate service. Acts of empathy activate reward circuits and oxytocin release, reinforcing unity perception. To see the divine in others is to weaken the boundary of I and them. Integrating science and research on non-dual awareness and flow states correlates with increased well-being and reduced default mode network activity. Measurable correlates of fan. When awareness no longer centers on the self, life becomes participation rather than possession. One acts fully, but without psychological attachment. Living dead to illusion does not mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging completely, but without the distortion of ownership. Die before you die is not mystical fatalism, it is psychological liberation. When illusion dies, clarity and compassion are born. The fear of death diminishes because what can die was never truly you. What remains is direct awareness, life as divine participation. Ibn Arabi's teaching aligns with modern science. The more fluid and transparent the sense of self, the greater the adaptability and peace. This inner death is therefore not destruction, but evolution, from identification to insight, from ownership to observation. The saying now reads less as command and more as invitation. Die before you die. Awaken before you vanish. You do not disappear. The false idea of separation does. What remains is the real, seeing through you.